Cool. So I've got here on this, we've got Stu, and we're just going to be talking a little bit about using Laravel and Ember together. So Stu had some questions about using some reusable code. It sounds like he had been using CodeIgniter and different MVC frameworks in the past, and then he's starting to look at more client-side stuff. Is that right, Stu?
Yeah, exactly. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm moving away from having everything inside the PHP environment. You know,
Right.
obviously, like I said, my last project, everything is powered by CodeIgniter and PHP. So, you know, the models, the views, everything was PHP, and I'd used JavaScript and a lot of Ajax calls. And I was chatting to my developer about it, and he was saying, you know, we really need to move towards having an API to handle all the data side, and then have a front end framework, which is client side, which
Right.
does all the stuff, you know, on the browser, so that you save on a lot of server side processing and all that kind of good stuff. So, you know, I'm with him, and I'm like, yeah, that's what we need to do. But obviously, I've looked at all the frameworks, and Ember seems to be the thing that people recommend, and you know, I've been looking at that, but you know, obviously, I'm moving from one background to a completely new one, and I'm just like, it looks like I'm gonna have to change the way I think.
Yeah, there's a
Because
little bit of a shift in the way that you're thinking, and one of the things that I've been really noticing lately is people are trying to force. I'm not sure how much you are familiar with other design paradigms other than just web MVC,
mm,
but a lot of people are like trying to compare it to MVC because there's a lot of the same words
mhm,
when you're talking about it.
yeah,
But it's actually much closer to, because you're creating these um, interactive applications instead of just a single render and the server dies.
yeah,
In PHP and Ruby, the server kind of stays alive, but really you're just making one request and
yeah,
it's stateless. And now you're moving to a client side where it's very stateful. So you're adding some complexity in that. And part of the thing that I would say is, if you don't try to think of it too much, your models are going to be the same, and a controller or component is going to have some of the same interactions, but views are much more interactive when you're uh, working on the web or working on a GUI in a traditional desktop environment. So that's one of the biggest things. It sounds like you've already got partials kind of down to an idea. So that's going to be really helpful with Ember. I'll start screen sharing in a second.
yeah,
But that'll be really helpful with Ember for you because you're already used to breaking these down into small component or small areas,
mm,
and those partials will directly map to either view partials in Ember or components.
right.
Um,
Uh,
so
yeah, I mean, what I've experienced so far is obviously coming from that background of where I'd use loads of partials and loads of view files, and then go into a view file and then load another view file, and breaking down all the markup basically into lots and tiny little segments. What I found that
mhm.
coming to Ember is like it doesn't seem to work like that. I can't just say, okay, I've got load the tasks view, and then from the controller, then in there I want to load the task view, and then from there I want to learn the task name view. It seems like in Ember everything goes into the index.html, and you know you've got controllers for this, and I'm
Mhm.
just trying to figure it all out, and it's just a very different approach, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so here I'm going to actually start screen sharing. Um, we've also got the questions thing open, so if anyone has any questions more on that side. So what I've got in this project so far, I have a directory called L5-Ember. I can put this on GitHub once we're done. And inside of there, all I've done is hit Laravel new, and I said Laravel new. I think I called it either web server or no, I called it Laravel. Um, so it's just going to have your standard Laravel installation. The only thing that I've done is put in a SQLite driver for database because I don't feel like setting up Vagrant and having a Vagrant machine install for a little hour-long demo, or however long this takes. And then I'm just running a PHP server on port 8000 using what is it, PHP-S localhost 8000 or whatever it is. The other thing that I've done is inside of kind of my root directory. This is the way I set it up. Is I usually have one directory for my web server, one directory for my client side. On a lot of the apps that we deliver for my company, and I've delivered in the past, freelance as well, I usually end up having something like Laravel or CodeIgniter still serve up all of my static assets. But I'm starting to move more towards using CDNs, S3. There's a service called DivShot that's really good lately. So that's, if you separate those, you never are really tied to always keeping your client with your server. And if you wanted to add, inside of this L5 Ember directory, you could add an iOS app and a desktop client and command line interface. Anything you want could really go in there, and all it has to do is know how to talk to your API. So I went ahead and ran Ember new front end, which Ember has an Ember CLI, which runs all of your development environment for you. So you can run a local server, you can test things out, you can mock things up, talk to, so like right now I'm using a proxy to proxy all my requests to localhost 8000 without having to deal with cross-origin forgery or anything like that right now. So it does a lot of heavy lifting for you, runs, no, messages, don't open messages. It runs your build, it runs tests, lints, and does a bunch of other stuff. So I've got that open here in Sublime Text. I'm using PHP Storm for PHP and Sublime Text for all of my Ember stuff. So really, let's go ahead and get started. I'm trying to think of what's a quick little example that we could do that's not a to-do list. Is there anything that you want to try out?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of.
I guess something that's got it's got a list, and then something that in that list you can change its state. I don't know, maybe a directory of people or something, and you can change the name.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create table people. Hit create. That's the command. So now I'm just gonna go into migrations and first name, last name. I think that'll should be enough. And I'm going to go ahead and make a new person model. And I'm going to set it to fillable. First and last name. That should be good for now. So now I can Sorry about that. My USB seemed to die out on me, so I lost control of some of my stuff on my computer for a second. Sorry, it's been a bit since I've... Okay. Set that up. All right, so I've gone ahead and run my migrations. So I've created that user table, and I'm just going to go into show me routes. Okay. I'm going to just do this inline for now. You can, of course, run this in your controller if you'd want. App. Oh, that's not what I wanted. App slash. So Ember comes with a data store already packed in. You can use just regular jQuery if you'd want to, but it kind of has its own ORM, and it keeps track of if I already have a person with an ID of 1, then I probably don't have to look that person up again. And if I have, so if it loads an entire set of resources, so it's loading, the people route, then it'll go ahead and just run it can keep that in memory instead of having to work with sorry about that. Instead of having to look something up again and make another AJAX call, it can just keep it in memory. It doesn't have to work around that. So now, if I go to localhost 8,000 people, person extends. So now I'm seeing I don't have any array of people, just because the database isn't seeded at all. So I can fix that by making a new post route. Of course, in a regular app, I would be doing this all with all of this in a controller, but for now this will work. So right now, Ember, it's not quite the exact same. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the JSON API spec.
Not well. What do you mean?
So JSON API is just kind of a standard of how you list out all of your JSON.
Yeah.
So kind of having a plural key, IDs, links to side-loaded content. So look, Ember by default, uses sort of a variation of that. When you have to go and side-load things, it's a little bit different than the spec. But for the most part, so whenever I post, it's going to give me all of my attributes for person inside of that person keyword in the JSON. So I can just do person create attrs, and that should give me a start for now. Oh, CSRF. Let me turn that off for now. So first name, great, and return because I didn't. There we go. So now I have my first person from my API, and it's showing in my index route. The next thing to do is let's actually look at what Ember's got. So, like I said, I ran Ember CLI, and then I have it serving its own development environment. So it's actually error connected refused. We'll see that in a second. So when I run Ember serve, it's actually going to boot up a live version of my Ember application, and basically all that's happening right now is it's going to this router, which has by default an index route. The index route first will go ahead and build. So Ember's built around the idea of nested views. So kind of as you traverse down the URL, it's going to nest more, or it can nest more and more content onto the page. So for instance, if I go to my training site, the application always will have the login bar and the footer, and then this home page kind of renders out everything else that it wants to. If I go to courses, the basically this little breadcrumbs is all getting rendered whenever it matches /courses. So when it goes to /courses preview, that gets pushed up here. So you're incrementally adding more and more nested components into your application. So if we go to templates, we can go ahead and create an index.hbs for handlebars, and just say this is the index page. When you save that, Ember CLI is going to automatically rebuild anything that's changed and refresh your page.
So
So
just a question on it then.
yeah.
So with these HBS files, does it mean you have to compile everything every time you want to test it?
So with Ember CLI, that's kind of the way for larger production apps. Is it gives you the full development environment, which will compile all of your handlebars, all of your JavaScript. You can add at work we add Sass on some projects, less on others. We have um, we have navbar.js that might be outside of the actual Ember application that we add into that, so it can all be minified, all be put into one set, and then kind of thrown together.
So these days, it's very rare to have just applications just running in real time when you refresh the page. You know, I'm used to just like Apple R every time. You know, I want to refresh and then just pulls in the jQuery and the JavaScript.
Right.
As
So
you go.
this is still kind of running in a regular browser. I can hit Apple R, refresh the page. It's just a lot of conveniences of, we're triggering the build by watching all your files for you with Ember CLI. So while we're doing that with tools like Live Reload, you're probably going to want to, see your page fresh as well. So it can do that. If you toggle off Live Reload, of course, it won't reload anymore automatically. So kind of talking about the nesting of Ember stuff in your handlebars application. So the first thing that it tries to render is a template for the entire application, and this is convention driven. So it tries to render first your application template, and then it will render, and then wherever you have this outlet, it's going to go ahead and render the route that it matches after that.
Right.
So let's go.
Is that HBS rendering? Is that done in a default Ember installation, or do you need this Ember CLI thing?
So there's kind of two ways. There's, if you go to Ember.
Because in the example, I'm running through the getting started tutorial right now, and it doesn't have any HBS. I don't think it has any HBS files.
Right. So in the example, you're using the starter kit right here. Yeah. So the starter kit was kind of before there was really a good build solution in place. So it was the idea of being able to put Ember directly on the page and write handlebars directly in your templates and everything.
Exactly, yeah. Which I just didn't find very elegant, because like you were finding everything was in the index.html, and I'm like, I don't work like that. I like to have folders and
right
aspect of the application and lots of little partial files. So that's what initially started me panicking a little bit and going, okay, how can we tidy this application up? And okay, so you're saying there's a
and that's. So my computer's freezing a little bit. Ember CLI is running. It's just it's an npm package that you can npm install globally, Ember-CLI, and then it's sort of like, I'm not sure if you've dabbled at all with the Rails command line tools. So it can generate new files for you. It can bootstrap up an entire project for you. It will run your tests. It can run a production server or a development server for you, and everything that you want. And then at the end of your project, you go ahead and run Ember build, and that's going to go ahead and concatenate everything down into a dist directory, and then you can put this on a CDN. You can drop that into your public directory in Laravel. You can modify that as if you want to, and it's going to have everything you need concatenated. Like, it concatenates all your vendor dependencies to a vendor CSS, all your application CSS into a single file, all of your vendor dependencies for JavaScript and your application. JavaScript, all of
Yeah, because that was my other.
all of that in there.
My next question was going to be, so in building the tutorial, it seems like every time I create so I've got a to-dos controller, then they say, well, you need to create a to-do controller, and you need a to-do model, and you need, so every time they keep adding new files, they say, oh, and just add it to your index.html. So I've now got about 10 lines of script tags, which are referencing all the different files that I've created. So it's surely, so that you're also saying is you don't have to do that with an Ember.
Right. So actually, let's go ahead. We can actually follow kind of what they're doing, and just look at it in Ember CLI instead of looking at it in kind of the old way of doing things. And I would suggest, if anyone's wanting to kind of learn more, I do have the training course on Ember Graph, which is using Ember CLI, all the best practices up to current, and it's so it's using, going through everything of how to create fake JSON data for you to use for now, because we don't cover APIs in the first thing because I didn't want to bog people down. But it's setting everything up with Ember Data, which is an abstraction layer. So with Ember Data, you can kind of flip a switch. I recorded the video for the API course about a month back, and it took me 5 minutes to flip the switch from, okay, here's all my fake data of just JSON files, and then you flip the switch and say, okay, here's my API, and everything just kind of works. So building it in best practices, going that way of being able to say, okay, here's what I'm wanting to do. I can mock everything up. I can make it clickable. I can go around it. I can list everything out, interact with it, and then when I have real data, if you're working with a separate server-side engineer, or you're wanting to build the client a prototype first so that they can say, okay, the interactions work, and then you just say, okay, now I just need to hook it up to an API, build an API with Firebase, Laravel, Express, whatever.
With regards to Laravel, then, you still, I know with CLI you're just creating an application in Laravel using the command line, it seems. Do you need Laravel? Do you still need Laravel if you're just building a front end which interacts with an API, or can you just use Ember? Or do you still need that to kind of? Do you still need Laravel to kind of contain Ember, if you see what I mean?
Yeah. So the way that we usually use Laravel is to build out our API, our business logic. It depends on what application we're making. So on Ember grep, like I have all of this front end is an Ember application. So you click around, everything's super fast, everything's zippy. You can purchase right there, all single page application. But I wanted to build out just a quick scaffold of when I need to go in to do lessons, and it doesn't need to be fast, it doesn't need to be interactive. So this is just regular Laravel views and routes.
Yeah, so
on the back end.
Things like authentication and so on. Once you start getting down that route, it's like, okay, so I need to log in, and then I need to access certain pages behind the login.
Right.
Would you say that at that point it's kind of like you need to use both, have Laravel for some of the session authentication stuff, and then just have Ember for the front end and the page displays?
Yeah, so I use Laravel as what I do for my API. So I know that there are people that are starting to go more and more like using Google App Kit, or is it Google App Kit, or Google Cloud Services, where it's like an API in the box and you just define what you want. I haven't found. We usually do a lot of very complex business logic, and those kind of solutions don't lend very well to that. Of, okay, you've added a comment in the stream, and now I need to email all the 5 people watching it and the 3 people that have liked and subscribed, and do all this kind of business logic, and that's a bit tougher with just an API out of the box. So that's why we use Laravel or Rails or Express on that, so that you build out your API, more in depth and validated and everything than what I'm doing kind of right here in this routes.php file. But essentially at the end of the day, it's input in through the routes and through cookies and headers and JSON, and then a JSON API getting spit out at the end of the day. It may do business logic in between or throw off queue jobs, but at the end of the day, it's kind of JSON in, JSON out. And that's what we use. We use Laravel for as when we're working with Ember. So if we go back to kind of the starter kit, when you're looking at where everything is inside of, for Ember CLI, everything's inside of this app directory. So it's kind of split out, like you were saying. You know, you thought it was really ugly to have everything kind of inline handlebars. That's not maintainable. It's not reusable. How do you bring in new components and stuff? So that's what Ember CLI is, a dedicated and first-party build tool. Because for a while, and it's similar in other frameworks right now, is there's no one build tool for working with React. There's a few popular ones, but there's no kind of blessed single path. So Ember is kind of on the forefront of that, of saying, okay, we've tried it for a long time, and everyone's kind of come up with their good ideas. We're going to take the best of all of them and try to work together and have one single thing that we can all agree on that's very flexible, but it makes things easier because you always know where to go. So you have the app folder, and all of your routes are going to be all of your kind of route registration, similar to a routes.php in CodeIgniter or Laravel. All of your route registration is going to be in this router.js file. Mm-hmm. And if you can kind of see, you have the router.map function from the starter guide, and then you have router.map over here. So we can add this .resource use path is that, and I think it does need, now it requires a function with a new API. I need to restart my Ember CLI server, and now that went ahead and built, I can refresh, and we're getting welcome to Ember CLI. And then we have this data template named to-dos, and we can take everything inside of there. Oh shoot. They truncated stuff, so I can steal that. And then now, when you're making a template, instead of creating these script tags in the DOM, you just go into the templates directory, create the same thing that you would name. So we're creating a template for to-dos. Mm-hmm. So we create to-dos.hbs handlebars file
using the naming conventions.
Mm-hmm. I can go ahead, put that in, paste it, and now we've got all that HTML starting to show up. Mm-hmm. The next thing to do is modeling data. So it goes ahead and says create a thing model to-dos. That's actually pretty similar to what you would do in Ember CLI. So I would create to-do.js and.
Why not to-do_model?
So what this is doing is it's using module syntax. So everything's getting loaded by its proper names. So and it's in this models directory. So you have models to do, Um,
So what is this code that you're writing now?
so the code that I'm writing now is how to pull in things. So since Ember CLI and kind of Ember in the future is kind of going towards the future of the web. It's looking at ES6 module syntax. So similar to a namespace use function in PHP, where you would say use app models user as user model. I'm saying this is basically my use, this is my user model, and then that's where I'm grabbing it from.
This is JavaScript. Basically.
Yeah, this is JavaScript. And then now we're just back to the same as the starter kit. File that away, save it, and like you were saying, every time it's like add something new to your index.html. We don't have to do that, and on top of that, we have everything live reloaded.
Okay.
Now there is some kind of weirdness with the way that the API has changed since these docs were originally created. It's been a little while. It's actually really cool. If anyone wants to get into Ember or any open source software, everyone kind of talks about how like, oh, go make some pull requests on the documentation. That actually is a lot better advice than you could ever really know, because like you say that and you're like, oh, what good does documentation? So now the guy that created a lot of the documentation, who's Trek Galowski, I can't remember. It's at Trek on Twitter and GitHub. So he started out not using Ember really, just kind of went through the documentation, and started digging through the code and trying to document it. And now he's one of the top, I think, 2 or 3 contributors on Ember. So he's gone through the documentation and he's made an awesome set of documentation, but unfortunately now he's kind of moved on to working on the core code and kind of left a gap of documenting things in that wake.
Why do you need that import DS from Ember data at the top? Because in their model they don't have that.
Right. So that's
CLI thing.
Yeah, that's the Ember CLI. That's with ES6 modules. So ES6 Harmony modules. Yeah. I think that it depends on what version you're using, but at one point this was sort of optional since DS was still a global variable, but I think that they've actually fixed that now.
Okay.
So there's just a little bit of changes to the API. So you add your fixtures like this now. And that should work. Okay. Next thing, displaying model data. Another thing is to set the adapter.
And you need the adapter because you're using Ember data.
Mm-hmm. So it by default it tries to use your API, and right now we're just using fake data. So this is what's really cool is because of the way that this adapter works, you can make everything else work the same. You can make everything else in your application the exact same as you would for local data or cookie storage data or anything like that, as you would for your API. You could fake it for now. Your API is finished. The server-side developer comes in and says, hey, your API is done, and you can just go to your adapter, change one or two adapters, and your entire application still works, but now is actually rendering to or grabbing data back and forth from the server instead of locally. I think that's the way to go. The other big thing that I would say is working with Ember is going to the Chrome App Store and grabbing the Ember inspector, which is super, super handy. And now I'm trying to figure out why it's not showing that I've got models. Oh, because I haven't actually loaded models yet. Okay. Right. So the next thing was to create a route. So just go to routes, create to-do.js, import Ember from Ember. Why write code when you can copy and paste? There we go. Oh, shoot. Ah, reopen class. That's what it was.
So why is that different to the default documentation, the reopen class?
So what's going on with reopen class is in Ember, when you're running Ember, kind of to get it with the starter kit, it's automatically instantiating a version of that model. So the second that you said, to-do model equals ds.model extend, it goes ahead and instantiates that. Whereas right now, this is still kind of an abstract class, and it's not actually an instantiation. So you're mixing in some more functionality into it before you go ahead and say, okay, the to-do class is going to be, an extension from BS model. And now let's go ahead and say, I'm trying to figure out where my fixture adapter is going wrong, because it looks like I'm trying to grab data, but okay. We'll figure out if that's still an issue in a second. So now I can take this li, replace it with their each loop they have. Go ahead and indent that. Save it. And now let's see. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what's going wrong. Let's see.
Is it to do with to-dos? Because you've got to-do.js and not to-dos?
No, so the model by convention is, oh, yes. Let me double check. Router. Yeah, you're right. I was like, what? Which file are you talking about with to-dos?
And you've
sure
also
enough.
got models.todo as well, todo.js.
So the model is singular, and then the routes are kind of arbitrary to whatever you want to do. So complete state. Let's go ahead. Go into here. So one of the things that you were talking about was building out partials.
Yeah, so I was just going to suggest, look, how could you get that each loop into another partial? So you call it todo.hbs or,
right.
You know, button.hbs or something, just literally abstracting all of that into separate.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and create a to-do. I'm going to call this to-do item. And I'm going to pass in to-do equals to-do. Basically, I'm just declaring what I want to build. And this is a Ember component. So now I can just create inside of templates components. I can create a new file called todo.hbs. Paste in all of that old HTML. And hopefully, let's see. Do I need to do? Naming things. To do item. So now that little bit can be its own thing right there. And then components can also have all of their own functionality too. So you don't have to only do your actions at a route or controller level. I can go into components and say to do item.js. Go ahead and I can say click. So this is a little bit of shorthand, so you can grab a click event, and let's just go ahead and alert this .get to do .title. So what we're saying is anytime we click an individual to-do item, let's go ahead and alert the title from the to-do object. And now if we go to Chrome, we should be able to click on one of these. It says learn Ember.js ... or Profit. So you can mix not only the interactions or the layout of what you're doing, so all the data binding and how you want things to render, but you can also mix and componentize the way that the user interacts with these small bits of UI.
Yeah, okay.
So that's about that. Starting to run on, I can't remember how long. Getting close to an hour. Are there any other big questions that you have?
No, I think that's good. I'll certainly. Is this recorded, by the way? Can you go back over it, or?
Yeah, this will all be recorded, and I'll let me go ahead and run.
Might have to look at it again, but
yeah,
there's some useful stuff there. Really appreciate your time.
So let me do one little thing though, because we can make this. Because I know you were asking how do you interact with Laravel as well. So I'm going to make an adapter for a person model. Copy this, and it's just going to use the REST adapter. I can take this to do, make it a person instead, and we said a person has a first name and a last name. Put that on the route to-dos, this.resource. What I'm doing now is I'm just trying to make a people route real quick. If we go to /people, okay. So that's a bit of an issue. I'm not sure why it's got this proxy error. So it's trying to, if we look at the XHR request, it's trying to make a GET request to /people. But for some reason right now, the proxy, I know that I have an out-of-date version of Ember CLI, and this was fixed at one point. So I think that this proxy error is just an issue with having some out-of-date dependencies. But if I usually run ember serve -- proxy, this will go ahead and send all of your AJAX communication over to this address, which is where I was serving my Laravel application. And let me double check that real quick. It may be that I just don't have. No, it's still error connection refused. But I also have, there's also a project that I have, it's Laravel 4, but if you go to github.com/artablata, there is a to-do Ember Laravel, which is a pretty old project, which is the exact to-do MVC implementation from the starter guide, and it shows you how to build a Laravel. It's a Laravel 4, but it shows you how to build a Laravel API for it. I also have that. Unfortunately, is not using that one's not using Ember CLI, so that's using kind of some of the old ways of doing things. I've got so many repos. There is the Laravel Ember one that I have, which has a early version of Ember CLI and a Laravel 4 installation, and this does a small markdown blog with Ember and Laravel, and then of course I'll post up what we've done today. Cool. Let me stop that screen share. And if you or anybody else is wanting to learn more about Ember, I I've got a course on getting started in building prototypes with Ember.js and Ember CLI, and that is on embergrep.com. And let me actually, give me a second and I can make a coupon code for the next few days. Oh, come on, here we go. And let's give it coupons. And double check it because I've had that happen in the past where I make a coupon code and then I forget to check that it works. So if you use the coupon code L5 for Laravel 5, that will get you a 20% discount right now on embergrep.com. So yeah, Stu, if you wanna say anything, kind of signing off. I know that you've been sitting around here, listening to me babber on for a while. So if you want to say anything.
No, I think takeaways are probably, Ember CLI is definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, and you can learn more about Ember CLI on ember-cli.com.
And yeah, I probably just will need to have a play with that and see how I get on with that. And I'll certainly finish the tutorial. But yeah, again, it's good to know that it's quite out of date. So
yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm hopefully going to be working with some of the core team to update those documentations and maybe take over where Trek left off, update it over to Ember CLI. The starter kit is still a viable option if you want to just kind of sprinkle in a quick little bit of Ember into your application. You can of course still do that with script tags and doing things in line. You can break things out the way that you want to, compress your own CSS and JavaScript. But if you're starting to feel like you need a bigger build tool, I would definitely go with Ember CLI for larger applications. So if you're doing more than just kind of embellishing a single form, I would definitely look at using Ember CLI because you're probably going to need it. You're going to need multiple controllers, multiple components, routes. If you're really dealing with any changes in the URL with Ember, I would go with Ember CLI. If you're just embellishing a single form, not that much, just want to put a widget on the page and deal with state, the starter kit still works. So
awesome. Ryan, really appreciate your time today.
all right, man.
Thanks so much.
No problem.
All right.